Révolution Digitale, épisode 60.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and you're listening to Révolution Digitale with Francois Lambert. Each week, Francois brings you global business leaders sharing the secrets of their success in French. Francophone entrepreneurs, this is for you. Prepare to ignite.
Bienvenue sur Révolution Digitale, le podcast des nouveaux entrepreneurs.
Get the top tips from leading global entrepreneurs in French.
Chaque semaine, nous parlons avec des entrepreneurs qui ont réussi et partageons leur expérience avec vous.
Join the entrepreneur revolution now and get ready to succeed.
Et laissez-vous inspirer avec votre hôte, François-Paul Lambert.
Builders and creators of the new economy, wherever you are, I salute you. My name is Francois-Paul Lambert, and I am the host of Révolution Digitale, a business podcast in French, during which I chat with inspiring entrepreneurs from around the world. Today we have a special episode for you. Our show is usually in French, but we know that some of you speak and understand English, and we also have some Anglophone listeners among our community. And last December, in episode 0, I actually announced that we would invite English-speaking entrepreneurs and that we would translate their interviews into French in order to promote interactions between our two languages, but also to help foster this famous cultural bridge between English-speaking and French-speaking entrepreneurs. Our cultures are different, but there are things to learn on both sides. Today we offer you our first bonus episode. We interviewed an amazing entrepreneur for you last May, and we present her to you today. This is the English version of the episode. There is also a French version, which you can find on our website or in your favorite podcast app. So stay with us and don't forget to register for free on our website to join the digital tribe, La Tribu Digitale. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Deezer, or on your favorite service. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You will, of course, find all the links in the show notes on our website. You are the digital tribe. Vous êtes la tribu digitale. So without further delay, let's get inspired. Our special guest today is the founder and CEO of Samasource and LXMI, two companies that go beyond charity to give work to low-income people around the world using cutting-edge social enterprise models. She's a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, a former board director of CARE USA, a 2012 TechFellow, a recipient of the inaugural Club de Madrid Young Leadership Award, and the youngest person to win a Heinz Award in 2014. She was named one of Fortune's most promising entrepreneurs in 2014 and was the subject of cover stories in Entrepreneur, Fast Company, and Conscious Company magazines. She is also the author of the book Give Work, where she literally shows us how it's possible to build a successful business that lifts people out of poverty. Tribu Digitale, we are so honored and excited to welcome today for this special episode an amazing entrepreneur, Leila Janah. Bonjour, Leila.
Bonjour, François.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really an honor. And I have to ask you this question when we start. Are you ready to inspire us?
I think so. I hope so. It's a big order. So let's see how I do.
I'm sure you will. So, Leila, I just gave a very short summary of who you are. Do you want to add something to this? And before we talk about your project, can you maybe give us a little insight into your personal life? Maybe an anecdote or something we don't know about you?
Well, I'm really into nature and the outdoors, and I spent a lot of time kite surfing and just got into backpacking recently. I was just this last weekend at Mount Whitney, which is the highest summit in the continental U.S. I'm really lucky to be from California, which, like France, has a lot of beautiful outdoor spaces to run around and play in.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, you're very much into the outdoor, into the nature, and it seems that you're bringing that philosophy also in your work because, I mean, you have so many projects and we're going to cover them in a minute. Samasource, LXMI. You also have written a book, Give Work, and the title is Give Work, Reversing Poverty One Job at a Time. I really love that. And in this book, you seem to postulate that giving work to people in need is more important or more impactful than just simple charity. Can you explain to us what's your thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I spent time working in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia from when I was 17 to today. And I spent a lot of time living with low-income communities and trying to listen and understand what they need most. And what I hear most often is that people want a chance to earn a dignified wage, and that if they can earn money for themselves, decent money, doing decent work, then they can pay their own living expenses and build their own. They don't need us coming from abroad to build their infrastructure for them. And I think that the traditional aid model is very paternalistic. It often deprives low-income or marginalized people of decision-making power, the chance to decide how they want to build their communities. So work is the most powerful weapon we have against poverty. And I strongly believe that the best answer to so many of the problems that stem from poverty, whether it's child malnutrition or lack of clean drinking water or poor access to sanitation, the root solution to those problems is work, is living wage work.
Yeah, and you're using work as a weapon with one of your company, which is called Samasource, if I pronounce it correctly. And can you tell us maybe how this company work, and do you generate revenue with this company? And why did you choose that particular business model?
Yes, that's right. So Sama means equal in Sanskrit. I started the company almost 10 years ago in September this year. We'll be 10 years old. And we specialize in lifting people out of poverty by connecting them to living wage work. And in our case, the work is to create training data for machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms. So we are often at the cutting edge of technology, including fields like self-driving cars, like more automated detection of diseases. There are many applications for artificial intelligence and computer vision algorithms in fields as, wide as those I mentioned, and biotech, just to name a few industries. And what we found is that we can train someone without a lot of formal work experience very quickly to use a computer and be able to do this type of work. And it's a stepping stone into higher level work. We started as a 501c3 nonprofit in the US. We remain a nonprofit, but we are now break even on the basis of our earned revenue. So we are a social enterprise that's dependent on our customers and on real client work to grow our business. So we're not funded in the majority by grants and donations, and that's a big difference between us and a more traditional charity. And my belief is that this model of social enterprise or social business can be a more powerful way to fight major social or environmental problems because there's a sustainability aspect built into the model, right? I'm not operating, at the whims of big donors. That said, of course, always a struggle for social mission organizations to grow and to raise capital. So I'm not saying we have the only solution. And it remains a challenge for us to scale.
Yes, yeah. And that's true that as a social enterprise, you've proven in some way that you can also aim for commercial success, and that's what will lead to this sustainability. And coming back to Samasource, do you train people? I know you're training outside of the US. Do you train people in Africa? Are there other places? How do you select your workers there?
So we have a robust recruiting funnel that involves partnering with community-based NGOs and nonprofits. And those organizations feed marginalized people to us. And we have a training program that's located on site at those partners where we give people access to basic digital training. And once they go through that, then they apply for jobs at Samasource centers, and we have a pretty intense screening process. What we're mostly looking for is someone's ability to learn quickly. So it's not so much that they have all these skills already, but that they're willing and open to learn, that they can take feedback well, that they're motivated and hungry for opportunity. And those baseline attributes enable someone to be an effective digital worker.
Wow, this is an incredible model, and we have quite an audience in Africa as well. So Tribu Digitale, let's keep that in mind because we're now going to explore Leila's path as an entrepreneur, the journey that brought her to where she is today. So Leila, let's start with this question. We call it the call to adventure, and now we're going really to your journey. When did you know deep inside that you wanted to become an entrepreneur, or at least that you wanted to do something on your own? And if you did not start immediately, what was holding you back?
I was always starting things. I started small, kind of more nonprofit initiatives when I was in high school. I started clubs when I was in middle school. I started my middle school's international club when I was maybe 13 or 12 years old. And I then in high school started a local chapter of Amnesty International, which is an international humanitarian organization. Mm-hmm. I was always interested in social justice and social change, and I always thought that there was an opportunity for me to do something directly in that space, but I wasn't sure how. And then I went to work. I studied development economics. I got the amazing chance to go to Harvard for my undergraduate degree, mostly because I had a really good scholarship there. Mm-hmm. My parents did not have a lot of money. And then beyond that, went and worked at the World Bank. And I was frustrated by a lot of what I saw as development orthodoxy. Many of my professors at university were older white men who had a very particular view about how development should be done and how macroeconomics work, mm-hmm. and the right sort of path for people. And I remember learning things like, culture shapes development. And some of the reason that poor people are poor is because they don't have the Protestant work ethic. I mean, it was literally something that many people believed at the time when I was studying this. And I found it very patronizing. When I went and worked in a poor community, I saw a very different reality. I lived in Ghana for 6 months in a small village when I was 17 and worked as a volunteer at a school for blind children. And the reality I saw on the ground was quite different from what I read about in the literature. Ghanaians were incredibly hardworking. People were desperate for any kind of opportunity. Women in the community that I lived in often had 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. So I saw the very opposite of what I had read about in the literature, and it didn't really add up to me. I also saw that the theory was that if we invested in human capital and educated people, that countries would kind of naturally follow a development plan. And what I saw on the ground was a lot of educated people who finished secondary school and still had no economic opportunity after that. So I thought, what if I figure out how to make a direct impact myself? Because I'm going to lose my mind if I end up being a cog in the wheel of a large development organization. And at the time, in order to be taken seriously, at many of these institutions, you had to have a PhD in economics. And I didn't feel like that was actually very relevant work experience for solving these problems on the ground. I felt like the best I could do was to create lots of employment for very low income people, pay them good wages, and they would solve most of these challenges on their own. And I became obsessed with this idea of social business after reading more about Muhammad Yunus and his founding of the Grameen Bank. He was a real pioneer. And the core idea that Yunus promoted around the world, I think the reason Grameen became so successful and the reason Muhammad Yunus ended up winning a Nobel Peace Prize is he championed this idea that poor people are not dumb. I mean, this sounds so obvious, but a lot of the development world kind of disregards low-income people entirely in decision-making. And what Yunus did was say, well, I've spent some time, with women, particularly in a poor village in Bangladesh, and they lack access to the basic things that you and I have access to that enables us to be successful, like access to a bank loan, right? And he said, well, what if we try loaning them money in small increments? It turns out they pay at better rates than most Western borrowers. And that small access to capital enables them to create businesses that normally they'd never have the capital to grow and expand, and enables them to, for the first time, participate in the global economy on fair terms. So his way of thinking really influenced me, because I thought if he can do it, if he can prove to the world that low-income women are more than capable of repaying bank loans, maybe I can prove to the world that low-income people are more than capable of doing digital work. And that was really the spark.
Yeah, and there's so many potential, so many power laying there. I mean, all those people, it's just brain power that is not being used in the world. And you had this idea, you were influenced, you did what nobody wanted to do, you did it yourself. And how did you find the courage to say, okay, I'm starting this? How did you find, was it natural, or did you need a little bit of a push to do it, or something else?
So I always had sort of a fire inside about doing things. I was always pretty active. I worked since I was 12. I had a babysitting business as soon as I was allowed to work. There was always a lot of motivation. And I think I felt restless often. I felt like I wasn't able to achieve what I wanted in the more traditional environment. And I had a tough time working. I worked as a management consultant right out of college. I had an amazing firm that I worked for with really wonderful leadership. And I still was frustrated because I felt like I couldn't stretch my wings and do what I really wanted to do. And I had what I thought were good ideas that I couldn't find a way to execute. So I was forced to go off and start my own thing. And I often think entrepreneurs are somewhat sick. It's very risky. It's very difficult starting a business, even once your business grows and gets out of the initial, are we going to go bankrupt every week kind of feeling that you have when you start something from the very beginning. When you grow, you often encounter some of the same challenges, just at a bigger scale. So it really does take a certain kind of person to be an entrepreneur. I don't advocate it for everyone. And I think you do have to be a little bit crazy and kind of willing to endure a lot of shocks and emotional pain and heartache. But then in the long run, you get the freedom and flexibility to shape the world as you see it.
Yeah,
so that's true. As you wish it to be. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, entrepreneur. I mean, the road of the entrepreneur is not for everyone. You're perfectly right. And also the road to success is full of pitfalls and obstacles. And you were talking about difficulties here, Leila. And I would like you here maybe to tell us about your worst time as an entrepreneur, as a social entrepreneur. Can you take us back to one of these moments and tell us that particular story?
So, I've started two companies, Samasource, which also includes our US program, Sama School, and LXMI. So in Sama, because we've had a few different programs within Samasource and we've tried to make them as independent and standalone as possible, that's the structure. With, I guess the hardest thing I've encountered has been mostly on the personal front. I think, you read all these stories in the media, and from afar or in retrospect, everything looks very linear and straightforward. And people say, oh, wow, you went to Harvard, you had a career as a management consultant, then you started this company. And it seems like such a easy path and prescribed path. But I think the only thing that keeps entrepreneurs in business in the long run is a willingness to not quit when things just seem impossibly hard. And in the case of Sama, I reached a point several years ago, it was now maybe a little over 4 years ago, where I was really struggling with several of my key board members and leaders on the team. I had a different vision of where I wanted to take the company than where we were going, and knew I needed to make some changes, and had to go through kind of a big fight and lose some of my key people. And any entrepreneur knows you're only as strong as your team. And those, for me, the biggest crises of confidence have happened when I've had to part ways with senior people at my company who I relied on, right? Often who knew much more about their domain than I did, because I never ran finance at a larger company before. I never ran operations at a larger company. My only work experience since the age of 25 has been growing and running Samasource. So those were really difficult times. And then I also think in my personal life, I feel like there's this myth that, you can, if you use the right life hacks, run a successful enterprise, sleep 8 hours a night, eat well, and be fit and have a good family life. And the reality is just totally different from that. Startups are all encompassing, and it often means you're not performing optimally in one part of your life in order to make your startup succeed. And in my case, I always focused on work over my personal life. And so I also went through a very tough time in my relationship at that juncture in my company, at precisely the moment when I most needed, that foundation, because work wasn't going so well. So having the two things erupt at the same time was really difficult. And I know many entrepreneurs who struggle with this fact, who've invested every part of their soul into making their startup successful, only to turn around and realize in their late 30s, oh wow, I've not invested in starting a family. I don't have children yet, and I
Right.
do think that building a family is a startup in and of itself. So to be clear, there are real sacrifices you make as an entrepreneur, and it's not all wonderful. It's not all the wonderful stories you read about in the news or the glamorous PR profiles.
It's true. The downs can be very low. And how do you generally cope with when you have a down moment in your business or personal life? Do you have like a routine that helps you with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I try to do as much as I can to realize my own insignificance in the world. And as much as I want to think I'm making a difference and I have built these wonderful organizations with great people, at the end of the day, we are tiny, tiny, tiny little specks on a tiny, tiny, tiny little piece of dirt in a vast universe. And at the end of the day, in the scale of the cosmos, none of what we do really matters all that much. He's going to make a difference in how the universe unfolds. And reminding myself of that is really important. It creates a sense of humility, and it also creates a sense of connection to the vastness of the world. When I'm less concerned about the day-to-day petty problems I face and kind of more contemplative about these vast timescales, it's soothing in some way. So I kind of access that through meditation, through adventure sports, and spending a lot of time, as much time as I can, in nature. When you look up, I was just in the Sierras, the Eastern Sierras, a beautiful mountain range in California that John Muir made famous. And when you're sitting there looking at Mount Whitney, which is a huge mountain in this very remote range, looking at the trees and the scale of the sky, it's really hard to get caught up in your day-to-day problems as an entrepreneur.
Wow. These are very, very wise words. And Tribu Digitale, I hope you're taking some notes here, because taking a step back is so important sometimes. Getting inside oneself and looking at the bigger picture is what can make or could make the difference. Thank you so much for that, Leila. And if you could here maybe summarize the key lesson that you learned from your experience as an entrepreneur, what would that be? I mean, in just a few words, what do you think our community should take away from your experience?
I think that, first of all, running a startup is not for everyone, and you don't have to start your own social enterprise to make a big difference in the world. Often people ask what they can do to help Sama, and I say it's to stay at whatever company you're working in and push that company to source ethically. So push that company to shift some of their procurement practices to hire vendors like Samasource. And there are many Samasources in the world in different categories, from fair trade chocolate to, fair trade handicrafts and rugs and you name it, right? So there are many ways that you as a professional can support social enterprise and help move people out of poverty. And I even think there are more ways to do that if you stay at your big company and make those changes from within. Moving the procurement of a major corporation by 1% in the right direction is going to have a much bigger impact than most social entrepreneurs will ever have in their lifetimes. Right. So that's one nugget. And the second is, if you are going to start a social enterprise or join a small enterprise in the earliest stages as a founding team member, realize that it is probably going to entail some dramatic sacrifices in your life, and be prepared for that, right? And if you don't want to do that, that's totally fine, right? There's a lot of dignity, and as I mentioned, a lot of impact you can make choosing a slightly different path. But it is really difficult, and I think many people are not prepared for that, and they start something and they quit, and they get frustrated. If you're not prepared for the really long haul of making sacrifices on a regular basis, it may not be for you. And there are so many ways you can support an enterprise without joining an early stage enterprise or founding one yourself.
Thank you for that, Leila. And Tribu Digitale, know that you can make a difference at every level. You don't need maybe to start a company, but if you do, you need to be prepared. You need to know what that entails. But that's a great experience too. Just be prepared. Okay, Leila, we've reached the last section of the interview. So here I ask you a series of questions in a rapid succession and you answer in just a few words, just getting to the point. Are you ready?
Yes.
So what is your definition of success?
Being happy.
What does your typical day look like? Do you have maybe a daily routine that helps you in your life and business? We've talked about meditation, but maybe you have one for your business?
I try to exercise as often as possible and get outside and be in nature at least once a day. I try to meditate whenever I can, ideally 10 minutes a day, but that's not always possible. And I try to get at least 8 hours of sleep a night.
If you could recommend one book, which would it be and why?
I wrote Give Work for aspiring social entrepreneurs and people who want to make a difference in the world meaningfully by ending poverty through the supply chain. So I'd recommend Give Work. And if not my own book, then Building Social Business by Mohammed Yunus.
Yeah. And we'll put all the references on your dedicated page on the website. Thank you for that. Next question is, which tools or application, productivity or not, technological or not, do you use regularly?
I use Slack basically every hour of every day that I'm not sleeping. I use Facebook Messenger, which I found to be really, really helpful, especially when I'm traveling internationally for free calls and video and communication with my teams and my friends. And I use the Paper app. My friend's company, 53, makes an app called Paper on the iPad, which allows you to make really beautiful designs. So I actually sketch a lot of the LXMI packaging and brand ideas on paper.
Awesome. And the inspiration question now is, what inspires you right now? And of course, you're inspired about giving work, but are there any other area that you think are promising or worth pursuing?
Yeah, basically my two biggest interests are in giving work, which addresses poverty at the root, and in solutions to the climate crisis. So really interested in ways we can promote conservation, especially of wild forests, which are one of the biggest defenses we have against climate change.
Awesome. And the last question, this is my favorite. This is the back in time question. So let's imagine, Leila, that you have the opportunity to go back in time and face your 18 years old self. You only have 5 minutes before the time portal brings you back to the present. With the experience you have now, what would you say to yourself? From a practical point of view, what would you do differently? What specific plan or advice would you give your young self to succeed, and which does not involve purchasing lottery tickets, sports betting, or investing in the stock market?
Pay less attention to what others think and what others are doing, and have more confidence in your own ideas and how you want to shape the world.
Leila, thank you so much. We've reached the end of the episode. Thank you for sharing all this generous information with us. Tribu Digitale, I hope you've been taking notes. I know some of you who are still hesitant to get started, and I hope that Leila's adventure will inspire you to take the plunge. So, Leila, for the last word, what would you say to our listeners who are still hesitant to embark as an entrepreneur or who feel stuck? If you had one last advice to give them, what would it be?
I think there are so many ways to find inspiration in the struggles of others. And the best way that I get unstuck is by rereading the stories of people who achieved great things in the world, especially in the field of social change or environmental conservation, through lots and lots of failures that would make most people quit. And basically everyone I know who's achieved something truly great in the world, whether it's Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring in the US, which was the foundation for the modern environmental movement, or Al Gore, who's really led a battle against climate change here in the US, or many of the civil rights leaders that we've read about who've changed the law to enable people of all ethnicities to have basic human rights. All of those leaders endured so many struggles that would have made most people just quit and go back to their day jobs. So that reminds me that the struggles I'm encountering are part of the process. If you want to make great change in the world, you have to expect that it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be an overnight success. Every day is going to be a struggle. And if you're not struggling, maybe that means that you're actually not tackling a problem that's big enough.
Leila, really thank you from the bottom of our heart. It was really a pleasure and an honor to have you today. So before leaving us, tell us how we can keep in touch with you on social network or elsewhere. And if you have an announcement to make, our community is listening.
Great. Please feel free to follow along at leilajanah.com. You can sign up for my newsletter there, and I post regularly on Instagram and Facebook about what I'm up to and just tips and tricks for being a social entrepreneur. You can also read about the journey in Give Work, and there's a link to purchase the book at leilajanah.com.
Tribu Digital, you've just listened to Leila Janah, who shared with you her experience and her advice. Now it's your turn. Join us on revolutiondigital.fr and type Leila in the search bar. You will have access to our dedicated page with all the information and references we mentioned today. And of course, don't forget to visit Leila's website at leilajanah.com and to follow her on her social networks. And more importantly, go buy the book, Give Work. Leila, thank you so much for sharing your adventure with the Digital Tribe. I say goodbye and I'll catch you backstage.
Thank you, Francois.
Thank you for listening to our guest stories this week.
Merci et n'oubliez pas de vous inscrire à notre newsletter pour encore plus de conseils qui vous aident à réussir.
We hope you're inspired and ready to move forward with your entrepreneurial dream.
À bientôt pour un prochain épisode de Révolution Digitale. Stay inspired!